There's that funny quote, there are decades when nothing happens and there are weeks when decades happen. It's being clearly one of those, considering whatever is happening in the US.
You need a relatively stable policy environment. You need to be able to figure out, what your raw material costs are going to look like with average inflation. And on the basis of that, you will take investment decisions. Now, unfortunately, in the, economic template of today, it's virtually impossible for any company to make that call.
Like, do we become an attractive option for a lot of allocators, global allocators?
India today has two very large advantages that it did not have in the previous cycle. The first advantage is
this is especially about US debt, the unsustainable fiscal deficit. I think they're running a 7%, 6 to 7% deficit. Like, does that really figure in your calculus when you're making sense of the world?
So far, the higher fiscal spending from the US equating to stronger growth has led to stronger dollar. And, one of the things that is already happening is that
Hello everyone, my name is Bhuvan and thanks for tuning into another episode of Please Help Me Understand. There's an old Chinese curse which goes something like, may you live in interesting times. I think that curse has finally come true. I don't think the world has been this interesting in a long time, in the post-COVID period, of course. On the one hand, Donald Trump has unleashed a massive tariff war. On the day that I record this, the US seems to have increased the tariffs on China to 245%. Just think about that. We are talking about two of the largest economies in the world and two of the largest trading partners imposing triple-digit tariffs on each other. And beyond a point, these numbers don't really mean anything. Like, does it really matter if the tariff is 150% or 250%? No, of course not. Like, after some time, trade will probably, if not grind to a halt, will readjust itself in ways that probably both the countries didn't really want. This tariff war has created a lot of uncertainty, and this uncertainty will affect financial markets and the global economies in unpredictable and unforeseen ways, because it's easy to guess the first order effects of this trade war. Of course, the prices of goods will go up. There will be probably an inflationary shock. There might also be a deflationary shock, because if the consumers are hit really, really badly because the economy slows down, that will lead to deflationary shocks. But beyond that, it's very, very hard to grasp the second and third order effects of whatever is happening in the United States and the fallout of the actions there on countries like India. For example, the other news story that broke today as I record this is that the US seems to be investigating imports of pharmaceuticals, etc. because and India is one of the largest exporters of pharmaceuticals to the United States. So there's a lot happening, and it's very, very hard to make sense of the world, considering the level of uncertainty. So in this conversation, I spoke to Suyash Chowdhury. He's the head of fixed income at Bandhan Mutual Fund, and he's probably one of the most thoughtful commentators on the Indian economy and the fixed income space. Because he's a fixed income manager, he has to know what's happening at a macro level. So in this conversation, I spoke to him about, of course, what's happening in the United States. What does it mean for India as an emerging economy? What do the gyrations of the dollar mean for the Indian economy? How will RBI be forced to react? What is it like? How will the current situation of the Indian economy affect whatever is happening? What does it mean for the growth trajectory of India, and a whole host of other important questions? The idea with this conversation was to make sense of the broader picture, because going forward, I intend to speak to other guests and dive deeper into specific areas like, let's say, currencies or other esoteric elements like, trade policy and so on. So this was absolutely fascinating conversation. Suyash spelled out in great detail the current macro landscape in both the US and India, and how do this both interact each other, and what does it mean for the Indian markets, and also what does it mean for Indian bonds. So I had absolute fun recording this conversation, and I hope you enjoy listening to it as much as I did recording it. And with that, please enjoy my conversation with Suyash Chowdhury of Bandhan AMC. Suyash, thank you so much for doing this once again. Whenever
Thank you, Bhuvan. Always a pleasure.
whenever crazy things happening, the first name that always comes to my mind is you. So the context is, again, like I was mentioning prior to the call, there's that funny quote: there are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. It's been clearly one of those months, considering whatever is happening in the US. So I want to start by asking you, how are you making sense of all of this? Like, what's your default assumption of what's happening in the world? Like, how do you make sense of all the idiosyncratic things that are happening in the world?
So, first and foremost, what is almost certain is that the level of uncertainty goes up, right? And, forget exactly what the level of tariff at this point in time is, because as we know, it is subject to constant changes. However, what they end up doing is they increase the level of uncertainty when you're making economic decisions. So imagine you are a company wanting to, let's say, put up plant and machinery investments for the next 5 years. You need a relatively stable policy environment. You need to be able to figure out, what your raw material costs are going to look like with average inflation, what your end markets are like, what kind of pricing subject to economic cycles you'll be able to charge. And on the basis of that, you will take investment decisions. Now, unfortunately, in the economic template of today, it's virtually impossible for any company to make that call. Obviously, to varying degrees of uncertainty. So, if you're sitting in India, you have much more certainty because our direct, correlation with US on a trade basis is not as strong. But nevertheless, you are subject to some uncertainty. However, if you're sitting in certain other countries where you are more export oriented, or you are more impacted by what's going on, then you are very, very unable to take any sort of decision. So the only thing certain, like I said, is that the level of uncertainty is higher, and therefore you have to examine through what channels uncertainty will
Right.
work. And one of the clear channels is it will delay investment decision making by companies. It may increase, precautionary saving by consumers. And all around, it may lead to some order of growth slowdown. Again, to various intensity, depending upon how directly impacted you are or not. But unfortunately, the growth drawdown will probably get felt around the world, including to a much smaller extent in India as well.
Got it. For a long time, the default assumption was that politics is maybe a little of a secondary factor when it comes to assessing the markets. And when things were relatively calm, I think it didn't really matter. But now I think everybody, whether they want to or not, is being forced to think about politics, not in the domestic countries, but in just one country around the world. Like, considering there is one central character who looms large over pretty much our entire lives, the global economy, domestic, whatever you want to call it. Like, how do you make sense of the person that Trump is? And like, do you really try to, for the lack of a better word, psychoanalyze his actions and figure out the first and second order impacts?
Look, in some sense, government economic policies and central bank monetary policies have impacted markets and the real economy for a long, long time, right? And in fact, let's dial back to before the tariffs came and look at the post-COVID US, where, a very large and substantial fiscal stimulus was rolled out, probably much beyond what was necessarily required. As a result of which, it has completely reset the trajectory of fiscal deficit for the US. So, as an example, pre-pandemic, US budget deficit used to be of the order of 3% of GDP. Now you are of the order of 6.5 to 7% of GDP. Right? So, this has nothing to do with tariffs. And yet, this is government policy that has impacted, markets around the world. So, it has impacted in two ways. One is the general level of US yields is higher, and therefore bond yields I'm talking about. And therefore, that has put some upward pressure on the general level of bond yields elsewhere as well. And secondly, it has fueled the so-called US exceptionalism trade, thereby leading to more strength for the US dollar till very recently, which also has impacted financial flows around the world. So, it's not just this episode where government macro policies are impacting, market and real economy outlooks. Although one must admit that at the current juncture, they are probably impacting to a larger degree. Also, one should remember this level of tariff volatility cannot sustain for too
Right.
long. So, it has to be almost a base case that, some formulation or some, order will get restored in the not so far future. However, one should not underestimate the lingering effects on growth that this uncertainty brings. Because even if, there are some interim, measures that are put in place, markets and economic agents may still doubt how long these measures will hold in their current form. So, which is why, like I said, the number one channel that you have to examine is what heightened uncertainty does to both financial markets as well as economic decision making.
Got it. So, even in your previous notes, I think the one recurring theme that you've written about multiple times has been, like you mentioned, this the idea of US exceptionalism. I think for pretty much the entire post 2008 period, the US has been pretty much the only game in town, and it has sucked capital from pretty much every other trade country, whatever you want to call it. And you had also expressed skepticism about whether this entire good run that US has had could continue. And it looks like this is like the moment that kind of breaks the straw on the camel's back. So, considering where we are and considering the insane amount of uncertainty that you mentioned about, like if you were to process what's happening, is this the end of quote unquote US exceptionalism? Like, we'll get to what that means, but like, are we finally seeing the tides turn for US?
Well, to some extent, yes, and probably this predates the tariffs, although the tariffs may have accelerated that. So, you referred to us talking about the exceptionalism trade taking a pause, and indeed, since December and in January, we have been examining, some of the reasons why the US exceptionalism trade exists, and whether those reasons are still relevant as time has been progressing. And let me just quickly run you through 3 or 4 reasons that we have examined. See, the first is a very, very large stimulus. And I'm just talking about the last 5 years. The exceptionalism trade is longer than that, but it got new tailwinds after the COVID crisis. So the first is, the very large US fiscal deficit expansion. Like I said, more than 300 basis points of incremental expansion on a sustained basis, which obviously has put a floor to growth, right? So growth is therefore stronger because you're spending more money. Second is, a lot of the tech and AI revolution has been out of the US initially. And that has also led to a lot of capex spending in ancillary places. So let's say data centers and utilities, etc. So, corporate capex cycle, both because end demand was stronger on the back of fiscal expansion as well as, the tech and AI revolution sitting there. Third is immigration into the US over 3-4 years till last year has been very strong, which has increased the labor force size and created fresh demand for products also, right? So if you combine these factors, all of them have meant that the US has been able to grow much beyond what people thought it should be growing for the last few years. However, if you see even the in the run up to the tariff, immigration had already started to slow, and it's likely to slow even further. So this expansion in labor force is probably not going to entirely sit, or rather keep benefiting via immigration. So that will also have an impact on end demand. Second is, you have seen that, parts of the tech and AI revolution are now happening out of elsewhere, including from China. So some of the ancillary investment that people thought will only happen in US is probably not going to happen from US to that intensity. And third is, the fiscal deficit levels are large, but the incremental fiscal stimulus is flatlining. So a lot of the excess savings from the post-pandemic era have been depleted. And the incremental fiscal stimuli is flatlining, although the level of fiscal deficit is still strong. So in terms of tech capex, in terms of expansion of labor force through immigration, as well as the incremental fiscal stimulus, these were all beginning to kind of taper off, thereby leading us to believe that for the kind of money that has chased the US exceptionalism trade, it is likely that this trade is now beginning to taper off. Then came the tariffs, and one of the remarkable things that many commentators have talked about in this last phase is that typically in a risk-off environment, the US dollar should strengthen. Whereas in the current risk-off, you have actually seen the US dollar weaken. And our sense is because it represents the net effect of two factors. One is flight to safety, where the dollar tends to strengthen. However, because there was a very strong ownership of US assets. And as more investors figure out that the exceptionalism trade is, if nothing, at least taking a bit of a pause, there may be some reallocation or diversification happening away from the US, so which argues for a weaker dollar. So these two effects on net are now leading to a weaker dollar, which obviously is relatively not as bad news for emerging markets like ourselves, because in a risk of if dollar is strengthening, then the risk of capital flight out of emerging markets is that much more. But in an environment where dollar is weakening, probably capital outflow from countries like India may not be too large.
Got it. So before we get to the the reshuffling of the deck, so to speak, this is a bit of a speculative question. I think this is a perennial worry that most people will have. This is especially about US debt, the unsustainable fiscal deficit. I think they're running a 7%, 6 to 7% deficit. These are unheard numbers outside what in peacetime, especially in large economies like US. Does this really? I mean, there's always a perennial worry saying that what happens to US debt. The $30 trillion number looms large in most people's heads. It's a shocking number. Does it really figure in your calculus when you're making sense of the world?
No, absolutely. In fact, so far, the higher fiscal spending from the US equating to stronger growth has led to stronger dollar. But you may very much arrive at a point not so far in the future where, the continued high level of borrowing leads to a bit of a re-rating of US debt, marginal re-rating. Right. And, one of the things that is already happening is that, let's say, emerging market bond yields to US bond yields, spread has narrowed and investors are fine with it. So, currently as we speak, as an example, India to US 10-year yield spread is only 200 basis points, right? India is around 640, US is around 440. And investors are fine. It's not as if you're seeing a very large stampede out of India debt, because investors understand that US is now experiencing a very different debt dynamics, a different fiscal dynamic, and bonds have to realign to this dynamic. Having said that, at some juncture, policy has to take cognizance of the fact that this is unsustainable level of deficit. And remember, this is without an economic shock. So if now incrementally growth were to slow because of the higher level of uncertainties, and because of which tax revenues slow, fiscal deficit in the US can even exceed 7% for a while, right? And like you said, these are peacetime. Yep. So it's not as if there is a very large defense spending mandate, etc., that you are executing. So clearly, this is not a sustainable path to policy. However, at this juncture, there looks to be limited appetite to correct this. So maybe a correction is down the line, but probably not in the very immediate future. One of the or two ways that we are getting reconciled to this world. One, like I said, is yield spreads are narrowing and investors are fine with it. So India can have its own bond rally, even if US is still stuck in the 4% area. And second is dollar is stable to weakening, which means that investors globally, despite high level of US rates, may still want diversification to their assets, including in well-run macro markets like India.
Got it. Going back to the fiscal point, I think one of the more interesting things that seems to be happening right now, we don't know if it's a clear trend or not. One is US wants to retrench. Whether they'll be able to do it or not is another question. At least one of the justifications that the US administration has given for their tariffs, etc., is the fact that US fiscal situation, like you mentioned, is unsustainable. They want to close it, and they think of tariffs as God knows among the 100 reasons they've given. It's a source of revenue. It's a tax policy, etc. At the same time, one of the side effects of whatever they're trying to do is Europe is now trying to loosen its fiscal purse strings. I think Germany doing whatever it has done, it's probably, I think most people wouldn't have said that they would have lived to see that moment in such a fiscally conservative country. And then conversely, there's also the other 800-pound gorilla, China, in the room, which seems to be, there seems to be interesting things happening with this currency. Like, it seems to be drifting lower. I don't know if it's a trend. I don't know what they're trying to do. Like, if in this trilemma, like, what does this mean for a country like India? I know we are largely a consumption-led country, and flows don't really matter all that much to us. But like, if these three, how do these three things play out for a country like us?
Yeah, so yes, granted, we are reasonably domestic oriented, but the state of the world does matter and capital flows do matter. So your questions are very important, and we have to, kind of get to the root of the matter to the best of our abilities. See, like you observed, what is happening in the US has probably played a part in the fiscal pivot in Germany specifically, and more broadly Eurozone, which, like you said, is a remarkable development and something that, provides a bit of an auto balancer to global investors. So look, if Eurozone remained a very weak macro story, then, as you are diversifying away from the US, you only have limited large scale allocations you can make elsewhere. But with Europe now beginning at least to provide some narrative there, but bear in mind also the fiscal spending will take time to fully materialize. But nevertheless, the intent is in the right direction. Then, you can actually have probably some capital going and sitting in Europe as well. On China, look, I think the first and the biggest thing that we need to take a view on is, will China devalue the yuan? Because if China were to devalue the yuan, then that would put pressure on the INR as well. And therefore, the risk of capital outflow from India will also be larger, right? And in fact, our view is that although there may be some market-led depreciation in the yuan, as there may be in any other currency, we don't think intentionally via active policy, China will devalue the yuan, right? We just don't think that. And we wrote about this also recently, in fact, in our post-policy note. And the reason we think so is that, if you remember, in the recent past, 10 years back, almost 10 years back, China had intentionally devalued the yuan.
There's a 2016, 2015.
And what had happened? Yes. And what had happened post that is, there was a lot of capital account outflows. Because, reasonably then investors start to wonder that if you're actively eroding the value of my investment, then is this the only thing you will do, or will you take further measures? So, in some sense, the trade benefit of the devaluation was more than offset by the capital account outflows. And for that reason, we don't think that will get done again. Because, the net benefit is just not there, because whatever you gain marginally on export competitiveness, you are losing a lot more on capital outflows because investors worry whether the value of their investments will remain intact or not. So we are differentiating between normal, orderly, market-led depreciation, which may very well happen, versus an active policy choice for a one-shot devaluation, which we don't think will happen. And therefore, we don't think that one should worry too much about any disorderly INR depreciation as well. So we think we are in a reasonably good place. Like I said, one of the big saving graces for this phase has been that the dollar is weakening into the risk off. And therefore, the pressure on emerging markets, including India, is not likely to be as large. At the same time, we should not be too sanguine. We have to take, measures to boost the domestic aspect of growth while ensuring overall macro stability.
Got it. This falls in the more speculative side of the question, and also feel free to laugh at it. Like one of the chosen justification, or rather one of the bigger talking points has been, which is also the flip side of this entire US exceptionalism concept, is like a potential quote-unquote restructuring of the dollar-based global financial system. There's all this chatter about it. I think some of the officials in the US administration had floated papers. There's a talk of weakening dollars, getting countries to buy century bonds and forego the interest payments. I know that there's a lot of noise. I know that a lot of this is just hand-wavy nonsense also. Like, do you think there is some, like, where there is smoke, there is fire?
So like you said, very speculative. I'll offer one perspective from our standpoint. See, being the reserve currency of the world has certain privileges and certain disadvantages. The privilege is that, you can, for example, as what happened in the last 3 or 4 years, you can expand your fiscal deficit very substantially and it still gets funded because, there's always a demand for dollar assets. One of the reasons there is demand for dollar assets is that other countries are running a trade deficit, right? Other countries are running a trade surplus. I stand corrected. Other countries are running a trade surplus and US is running a trade deficit. So therefore, US is able to export out its dollars. There is, therefore demand for these dollars and the international system continues to be lubricated. The flip side is that you get a relatively stronger dollar, which means that producers have a disadvantage, and therefore, you almost inherently have a consumption-driven economy, an import consumption-driven economy at that, because imports are cheaper on a stronger currency. Right now, you have to kind of weigh the two. Which one is the more important aspect to you? Continuing to unequivocally be the reserve currency of the world and enjoy that faith, and therefore the advantages it brings, or try to weaken your currency and in the process risk at least part jeopardizing the faith that US based investing has. So we are today in that interesting scenario where one has to see how the net effect of this plays out. I'm sure it won't happen in a very dramatic fashion either way, but in my view, these are the pushes and pulls to think about. Whether the confidence channel that leads to stronger than otherwise currency is more precious to you, or an active effort at depreciating the currency and getting some export advantage, but at the cost of some bit of confidence eroding, is more precious to you.
Got it. This is not really a question, but like you rightly opened a conversation with, there's unprecedented. I mean, I hesitate to use the word unprecedented, but there is unprecedented amounts of uncertainty at this point. There is more that we don't know than we know. Considering whatever is happening, like if I were to ask you, what are those unresolved questions that you've been grappling with, considering that you more as a fixed income manager have to pay more attention to the macro headwinds than equity investors? Like, what are those questions that you are grappling with that you don't have clear answers to?
So, we have 4 questions on the table, and we address that also in our post-policy note, which is very relevant to me as a fixed income investor and as a macro watcher. The first is what the Fed will do. The second is, what happens to the dollar in this phase. The third is whether China devalues their yuan. And fourth is how much policy space will RBI have. Right? These are the 4 questions you have to answer, and they are in a lot of ways interlinked also. And some of these we already answered, but let me just run through them quickly. So first, what the Fed will do. Sure. Now, today, Fed's both sides of the mandate are getting jeopardized. So inflation will suffer at least a one-time shock because of higher prices owing to tariffs. And second, because of economic growth slowing, unemployment will rise. Now, in the Fed's framework, what they say is that in case there's a conflict in the 2 mandates, we will look at the distance from target each mandate is at and the time taken for it to return to mandate. Right? So they will basically react to either inflation or growth, depending upon which is more severely impacted and which will take more time to return to its normal path. Our sense is that the Fed will decide in favor of addressing growth. Because, in an environment where heightened uncertainty is leading to economic growth slowdown and therefore higher unemployment, almost by definition, the tariff shock will not have second order effects because demand would have weakened. Right? So, although there is a one-time jump in inflation, the problem on the labor market side and the growth side may be more sustained. And therefore, the Fed will move to address that. So we think markets are right to price in 4 to 5 rate cuts from Fed over the next 1 year. If at all the risk is for more, I would think, depending upon the severity of the growth shock. So that is the Fed. The US dollar, the second point we already spoke about, it's heartening as an, sitting in where we are sitting to see the dollar actually weakening into the risk off. China devaluing the yuan, we already discussed. We don't think that will happen. And the fourth is RBI. Look, so for RBI and the governor was very articulate in the post-policy, in his policy statement and the post-policy discussion as to how the RBI and Monetary Policy Committee are going to act. So for India, the inflation shock is not that large. In fact, we have a lot of buffer now built in because, we are at now 3.3% inflation, CPI inflation, right? So there are buffers built in. Whereas, although the growth reduction may be much lower than many other markets, the fact of the matter is through the confidence channel, through direct hit to exports, you are going to see a hit to growth. And the RBI MPC are clear that therefore, their net reading is that the impact on growth is likely to be the one that will win the day for them rather than worry about inflation. And to that extent, they cut rates again and they change stance, thereby indicating that further rate cuts may be very much coming sooner rather than later. The second reason why we think the bulk of the effort will have to rest with RBI is that we think the government is rightly choosing to be fiscally conservative and create, confidence in the eyes of global investors that we are fiscally credible. Right? So it's a long journey that you have to go through. And the government has gone through it over the last 4 or 5 years. You see how responsible they have been with fiscal expansion and then compression to address the COVID shock and then consolidation again. And they have now laid out a 5-year path on debt to GDP also. And we very strongly think that by and large, unless there is a very large growth shock, which we don't think will happen, the government should stay the fiscal course. Plus minus 20 basis point here or there does not matter much, but nothing beyond that. And therefore, most of the cyclical growth slowdown has to be addressed by RBI, and there is room there to act. So if, projections pretty much are 4% average CPI for this financial year, you still have room to act on repo rate, on liquidity, which RBI already has turned very proactive on, and, general loosening financial conditions through monetary policy. So we think, so in fact, earlier we thought the terminal repo rate in this cycle will be 5.75. We now think it's going to be 5.5. And there is a risk that it's even lower if the size of the growth damage is bigger than what we currently think.
Got it.
So, there is enough room for rates to fall in India, especially also because the government is holding a fiscal stance and RBI is now providing adequate amounts of liquidity.
Got it. So you pretty much answered my next question, but just to pick out if there are any other elements of this. So one is, I think this last 5 years have been like the worst of all ways for the Indian economy in one way or the other. First we had the COVID shock, then we had the pronounced inflationary shock. Food inflation was pretty much uncontrollable and seems to be moderating now. And then you had the heat waves, and then government also, I think in the last, especially the post-election period, if I have my sense right, seems to have slowed down on the spending, and that hasn't really recovered as much as most people would assume. And sort of the debate has been whether this is a cyclical slowdown, like you are probably leaning towards, or are there any structural reasons? So the contributing factors are, of course, credit growth seems to have sharply slowed down. There seems to be something happening with urban consumption, while rural seems to be picking up based on commentary, etc. Like, what's your growth assessment apart from the factors that you're pretty much already spoken about?
So look, from a medium-term standpoint, I think in India today has two very large advantages that it did not have in the previous cycle. The first advantage is that balance sheets are, generally speaking, clean. Right? So we have been through our credit and NPA cycle. Don't get me wrong, there are business models that may be suffering stress. So I'm not saying everything is clean, but credit risk or balance sheet stress is not a macro problem. Right? So generally speaking, lender and borrower balance sheets are relatively clean. And therefore, there is a certain amount of resilience embedded in balance sheets to withstand a bit of a growth slowdown. So that, I think, is a very, very big advantage. If you recall, in the run-up to the 2020 period, there were a lot of balance sheets which had still to work through their credit stresses, but all of that is now behind us for the most part. Second advantage is that our current account deficit dynamics have undergone a sea change. So remember, India used to be almost a 2.5 to 3% current account deficit country. Now we are largely a 1% current account deficit country. The reason is that on a monthly basis, India used to post a services trade surplus of $6 to $8 billion, which is now on a monthly basis $15 to $18 billion. So this entire, global offshoring of services phenomenon, the global capability centers, etc., that are, getting attracted to India, all of that has contributed not just to an expansion of the commercial real estate market, but macroeconomically a compression in our current account deficit because of a bump up in our services trade surplus. Now, these are two positives that pretty much are intact. You may see some slowdown in services trade as US slows, etc., but I don't think it reverts to what the previous dynamics were. So you have inherent strength to withstand a period of lower growth. And like we discussed, RBI has enough residual firepower left to address a cyclical slowdown. On credit growth, remember, we have had a period of regulatory tightening and liquidity tightening, which has also had an impact on credit growth.
Right.
And a lot of that now is getting unwound.
Right.
Right. So liquidity dynamics have completely shifted from where we were as recently as December, January. A lot of, potential regulatory measures around, various things. So project financing guidelines, economic capital loss guidelines, etc., have been deferred. So, some of that will also start to show in banks and lenders' better ability to now expand credit. Although if there is a cyclical slowdown in growth, that will also partly reflect here. So long story short, we will slow, but we are not extraordinarily worried about that. There is inherent resilience that will mean that, we can very easily withstand that period. And RBI has enough, residual firepower to be able to address whatever we experience. One thing which we continue to look for is, barring, like I said, 10-20 basis point here and there, we would expect the government to hold on to a fiscal stance, which already has bought us a lot of credibility in the eyes of global investors. And we think that is important if we think about the next 5 and 10 years.
Got it. So, this may be a little bit of a speculative question, but on a more longer term, are you worried about more structural reasons that may be putting like a dampener on the growth? Does something keep you awake at night?
Look, the general template of global growth is now weaker than before.
Right.
So, and this is not just pertaining to the current phase. We are experiencing some sort of a gradual deglobalization. We are experiencing greater climate volatility. We are experiencing greater levels of debt than before. All of which basically argue for the general average level of global growth being lower than before. On the flip side, if there are massive enhancements to productivity, courtesy, AI, etc., then we will see, that can potentially offset these drags, but they are all not here yet. So in that context, given that generally the world growth rates will probably be a shade lower, Indian growth rate may also settle somewhere in the, let's say, give or take the 6.5 area, right? Plus or minus, depending upon cyclicality. Apart from that, look, there's nothing that, there are things that get talked about in terms of manufacturing expansion, etc. But, those things, to whatever extent the world order permits, will happen over a period of time. This positive, I cannot emphasize enough that it's nothing short of a services revolution that we have seen here, which is, the great service onshoring phenomenon that I referred to, which has compressed the current account deficit.
Right.
And, which has led to so much more, opportunity generation in the country. And bear in mind, the kind of GCCs that are getting established here now are not just, low-tech back-end work.
Yeah.
It is the whole value chain, right? So a lot of competence shift is happening here. We are attracting all of that. So, that leap we have already taken. Let's see how much more inroads can be done into global manufacturing in the phase ahead. But broadly speaking, we remain quite optimistic. We do think India is at the cusp. And, if we continue to keep our macro house in order as we have in the past, then there's every reason to be optimistic about the next few years.
So I just want to pick up on the question about what's happening with the dollar and also about the US bonds. So like you rightly pointed out, the surprising thing that's happening is dollar is doing a complete opposite of what typically happens when a risk-off period. One, is that really telling you something about the dollar itself? And the two, is there any negative to this low dollar period, or is just a good thing that's happening and we should just be happy about it and not really think too much about it?
Well, like I said, we think it's the net of two effects. One is the dollar strength that happens in a normal risk off. But this time around, the other is that the need to diversify, given that there was very strong ownership of US dollar assets into everyone buying into the exceptionalism trade. And now that is taking a bit of a pause, you need to be able to diversify out. right? So, and the net effect of that seems to be that the dollar is weakening. Now, for the time being, it is good news for us, because remember, if the dollar were strengthening, rupee would have weakened. RBI would again have to sell, dollars. That would have further led to, destruction of rupee liquidity. It would have told on the level of FX reserves. All of that, we are getting saved from to some extent, because the dollar is weakening into this. So for us, as far as I can see, talking to you at this moment, this is unambiguously good news. On US rates, if you remember, in the immediate aftermath of COVID, there was a phase where US rates had suddenly risen, and then they had fallen back again. And that tends to happen, to the best of our understanding, also because a lot of margin calls and position clearing happens, where the collateral given is liquid US treasuries, and those then need to be liquidated.
Right.
Second, people have spoken about hedge funds putting on basis trades, where they basically are running the arbitrage between cash bonds and the futures market. And if those are getting unwound, then you have to sell cash bonds out. So I would still wait for some bit of settling down of this. And eventually, given our view that the Fed will act in favor of shoring up growth, we should think that US treasuries should also begin to come off. The only caveat there is just what kind of an eventual fiscal plan gets passed and implemented in the US. If it's very aggressive, then obviously the curve there may continue to steepen. If it's not, then there's hope for the rest of the yield curve to also shift low.
Got it. Picking on the rupee part, I think pretty much the entirety of the second half of the last year was discussion about what's happening with the rupee and whether the RBI was caught flat-footed, wrong-footed, whatever term you want to use. And I think some of those pressures seems to have eased, and the recent measures that you pointed out with RBI putting in liquidity measures, etc., I think seems to have, to the limited extent of my understanding of these complicated areas of the market, seems to really help the market. Like, sketch out what's happening with the rupee, like good news, bad news, where are we? Like, how do you see that situation?
So, first of all, one has to also give the RBI some benefit of doubt, because the context is very different from what it was October to December compared to what it is now. So there you had a very large run up in the US dollar and a very sharp weakening of the rupee. And therefore, the RBI had to intervene in order to manage the pace of depreciation. Also, you recall that inflation was still much above target. Right. So RBI was not in a mood then to cut rates, and therefore there was very little thought possibly given that we have to significantly expand liquidity. Right. Compared to that, today, like we said, dollar index is weakening, and therefore some of the pressure on the rupee is off, and inflation has fallen to below target, and the forecast is it will remain at target, thereby allowing room for RBI to cut. And, there are distinct signs that there is probably going to be some pressure on growth. So the context as we sit now and over the last 1 or 2 months versus the October-December period is very different. But what it has meant for the market is that RBI has really swung into action as far as liquidity creation is concerned. They have bought sizable amounts of bonds under OMOs, and they continue to do that. And, the rupee has found some bit of a stable band, at least for the time being. And at least moving in an orderly fashion.
Got it. So the only other question that I had was, now that the Indian bonds are open for global investors, I think a lot of money seems to have come in, a lot compared to a baseline of zero. I think if I remember correctly, you would mention in one of your notes that the ownership is still in low single digits. Considering the reshuffling that's been happening with money moving potentially away from US into Europe, etc., like what is it? Does this really mean that, let's say, for example, considering the relatively higher yields that Indian bonds have to offer, like, do we become an attractive option for a lot of allocators, global allocators? And two, what does this mean for our own, bond yield dynamics and currency dynamics?
Look, so we absolutely think that India government bonds are still very under-owned as far as global investors are concerned. It's 3 point something, if I recall correctly, is the ownership of FPIs as proportion of government bond outstanding. In any comparable emerging market, it's going to be a double, triple, even quadruple of this if you see the numbers. Now, we are one of the largest market GDPs We are a top 10 bond market in size, if I recall correctly. We have one of the best run macros around the world, which is well appreciated. We have policy stability for the largest part, and all of that is getting noted, right? And we just had beginning of the year FPI trips, so a lot of global investors, kind of visited the country to just look at what's going on, and you should see the kind of interest that you now see versus even a few years back.
Right.
So we think this FPI journey will continue for the next 5 odd years at least, with breaks in between depending upon global volatility. And as if the US dollar is making a medium term top, because as you noted, the exceptionalism trade has been going on for a while now. And if the US dollar is making a medium term top, then all the more incentive for global asset allocators to look for other large, well run markets where they can allocate significant chunks of capital. And I do think India will be one of those markets that they will choose to invest in. What this means is, look, the demand supply dynamics for bonds is likely to remain reasonably good for the next few years, especially as the government continues on a path to consolidate debt to GDP. One other thing that has happened locally over the last few years is the additional rise in long-term investor allocations into the bond market. So insurance, pension, provident fund sectors, participation has gone up. So all of that bodes well for the stability of India's bond market. It also justifies holding asset allocation perspective to bonds because typically sometimes we find that Indian investors tend to be much more impatient than global investors when it comes to buying debt. And quite ironically, because fixed income offers you at least interest income, but fixed income allocations are the ones that are always thought about as very tactically, which it should not. We think fixed income should have a permanent place in your asset allocation table. It's the weightage given to relative asset classes that can change depending upon the market and macro cycle you are in. But I continue to hope that local investors also appreciate the transformation that is happening in India's fixed income market, something which global investors do seem to be appreciating a lot.
Got it. So I just want one final question. This is one interesting thing I picked up from your notes, which is you mentioned the peculiarity, sort of the disconnect between short maturity bonds and long maturity bonds because of the structural permanent demand from, let's say, insurance, pension funds, etc., on the long end of the bond curve. If I remember correctly, I think 30-year bonds or something like that. And you mentioned that this seems to have changed the sort of the behavior of the bonds, especially in the long end. Like, what does that mean for yields, and what does this mean for the structural nature of the market itself?
So, there was once a time not so far back when we used to think about 30, 40, 50-year bonds as very exotic part of the yield curve, and we never used to think about venturing there because we thought, that part is illiquid, that part is riskier. All of that is changed with the transformations that I spoke about over the last few years. And therefore, we as investors also are very happy to own that additional duration that the 30-year maturity brings to us. That part of the curve tends to have its own quirkiness still to some extent because insurance provident fund flows ebb and flow a bit. So in parts they are very strong and therefore the long end performs very well, and in part they slow down. So since September, October last year they have slowed down a bit. So the long end is underperforming. But as a real money investor, as an asset allocator, we think that's a reasonable part of the curve to be in. For investors, although one should have the risk appetite. So one thing that keeps happening is that when there's momentum in the market, many investors get into duration products. And then when the momentum turns for a bit, they realize that this was much beyond the risk appetite that they thought they had. And therefore, you should construct your asset allocation even within fixed income, keeping your risk appetite in mind and keeping a long enough investment horizon in play. But subject to that, we think, duration in India still looks reasonably good to us. It will have intermittent volatility There's no taking away from that. But if we continue to hold the fiscal stance that we are holding, and we continue to be regarded from a macro stability standpoint the way we are regarded today, we think the FPI discovery of India bonds is only at a very nascent stage, and we'll see much more of that over the next 5 years.
Got it. Thank you so much, Yash. And whenever I listen to you, I always learn something. Thank you so much for doing this on such short notice.
Thank you, Bhuvan. Pleasure to be
Got
here.
it.